a love affair inside prison walls, a secret plan worth $700,000, and two brutal murders that would shock Texas law enforcement. Vicky White was a wife, a mother, and a respected corrections officer. Casey White was a convicted felon with a violent past. Together, they became cold-blooded killers. But in a deadly twist, only one would survive. A corrections officer is expected to uphold the law, to control chaos, to keep a clear line between themselves and the inmates. But sometimes, that line gets blurred. Sometimes, it disappears completely. For Vicky White, what started as a seemingly harmless connection with Casey White would soon turn into an affair fueled by greed, deception, and an irreversible betrayal. The plan was simple, at least, that's what they thought. A husband, unsuspecting. A life insurance payout that promised a future built on blood money. But murder is never as clean as it is in the mind of a killer. And when the dust settled, the ones who thought they were in control would learn a deadly lesson. Family and friends saw the warning signs, but no one could have predicted how far Vicky White would go. No one thought that a woman who had dedicated her life to the justice system would turn against everything she once stood for. And no one imagined that the very man she risked everything for would be the one to end it all. With time, detectives, family members, and those closest to the case revealed the chilling truth of a deadly love affair. The manipulation, the lies, and the final betrayal that left one dead and another behind bars forever. They were the kind of couple you'd see at Sunday barbecues, smiling for photos, standing side by side at family gatherings. Vicky was strong, dependable, always talking about the future. Casey was quiet, steady, the kind of man who never needed to be the center of attention. They had built a life together, one that, to anyone looking in from the outside, seemed stable, predictable, safe. But behind that carefully constructed image, there was something else. Something no one saw coming. Vicky White spent her days in a world where power and control meant survival. The prison walls weren't just there to keep inmates in. They were meant to separate two very different lives, one inside, one outside. For her, those lines didn't just blur, they disappeared completely. While her husband, Thomas White, was at home, trusting, unaware, she was forging a bond with someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Casey, an inmate serving time, a man whose crimes had already shown what he was capable of. A man who saw an opportunity and took it. Friends described Vicky as devoted, a woman who never spoke a bad word about her husband. But looking back, there were signs. Late-night phone calls. A change in her routine. Small things that, at the time, didn't seem important. And yet, those small things were the beginning of something no one could have imagined. She loved Thomas. That's what everyone thought. They had been together for years. They had built a life together. There was never a reason to question it. But love isn't always what it seems. And devotion doesn't always mean loyalty. Inside the prison, Vicky wasn't just another officer. She had caught the attention of Casey, someone who knew how to manipulate, how to twist emotions, how to turn small conversations into something deeper. It started with stolen moments. A glance. A quiet conversation that no one paid attention to. In a place where nothing goes unnoticed, somehow, their secret remained hidden. For a while, she worked long hours. That was nothing new. But there was something different. Something changed. She wasn't the same person anymore. At home, Thomas trusted her. He had no reason not to. When she said she was tired from work, he believed her. When she came home later than usual, he assumed it was part of the job. But the truth was darker. Every late shift wasn't about work. Every moment spent at the prison wasn't just about duty. A plan was forming, one that would change everything. It started with whispers. A dream of a new life, far from the responsibilities, the struggles, the day-to-day routine of marriage. It was intoxicating. The promise of something different, something thrilling. But dreams built on deception always come at a price. And the price? A life. It never happens all at once. No grand moment, no dramatic shift. Just a series of small choices, each one seeming insignificant on its own. A pause too long during a routine check. A conversation that lingers past what's necessary. A favor done in secret, unspoken but understood. That's how it begins. Vicky knew better. She had seen the warnings, sat through the training, heard the lectures about boundaries and professionalism. She knew that inmates manipulate, that they find weaknesses and exploit them. But knowing and feeling are two different things. And feelings, once they take root, are harder to control than rules on a page. At first, it was harmless. A few words exchanged in passing. Casey was just another inmate in a sea of faces. But he wasn't like the others. He had a way of making people feel seen, of knowing exactly what to say. He asked about her life, about her days, about the little things no one else noticed. It was flattering, addictive, even. And in a job where most days blurred together into routine, it was something different. She told herself it was nothing. Just talk. Just passing the time. But words have weight, and soon she was seeking him out, finding reasons to pass his cell, staying just a little longer than she should. She had power over him, in theory, but in reality it was the other way around. He studied her the way only a man with years to think and nothing to lose could. He knew how to spot vulnerability, how to find the things she didn't say, the stress in her voice, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she hesitated before walking away. A handwritten note appeared in a place only she would find. Just a few words. Personal. Intimate. Words meant only for her. She hesitated before tucking it away, telling herself she'd throw it out later. She didn't. One note became two. Two became 10. The line between officer and inmate blurred. And then one day, it disappeared completely. They spoke in hushed voices, their words filling the empty spaces between the sound of prison doors locking, radios crackling. He told her things she had never heard from anyone else. That she was special. That she deserved more. That he understood her in a way no one else could. And she believed him. Inmates talk. They always do. And the whispers started early. She was around him too much. She laughed at his jokes when she thought no one was looking. She lingered. And when inmates notice, staff do too. She was always around him. Too much. We all saw it. Inmates talk. We knew she was in love with him before she did. By the time she realized she was in too deep, it was already too late. What started as a distraction became something dangerous. Something that would cost more than either of them could afford to lose. Something that would end in blood. It was never just about love. Love alone wasn't enough to risk everything. Her career, her reputation, her family. But love mixed with something more? That was dangerous. And this was about more than just passion. This was about money. About freedom. About a future that could only exist if her husband was dead. The life insurance policy had been in place for years. $700,000. Enough to disappear, to start over, to finally be together without hiding. They talked about it in coded words, over stolen phone calls, through messages that could never be traced. But the meaning was always clear. When can we do this? It has to look like a robbery. No mistakes. She played her part well. At home, she was still the dutiful wife. The woman who made dinner, kissed her husband on the cheek, told him she loved him. But every night, when she lay next to him in bed, she was already thinking of a future without him. A future with someone else. She knew his routine better than anyone. Knew what time he left for work. Knew which doors he left unlocked. Knew when the neighbors were home and when they weren't. Every detail mattered. Every piece of information had to be perfect. So she planned. And he listened. In his cell, miles away, he took notes like a student preparing for an exam. The layout of the house. The way the security cameras faced. How long the police would take to respond. It had to be clean. No loose ends. A break-in gone wrong. A home invasion. A crime of opportunity. That's what it needed to look like. But it wasn't just about pulling the trigger. No, the hardest part was waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for her husband to die without suspicion. Waiting for $700,000 to change their lives forever. But things like this, things built on greed and desperation, rarely go according to plan. Because what she didn't know was that someone was already watching. Someone had seen her whispering in the prison halls. Someone had noticed the way she lingered too long outside his cell. And as the plan moved forward, as they got closer and closer to making it real, the walls were already closing in. They planned it like a military operation. They thought they'd get away with it. But the problem with perfect plans? They never stay perfect for long. He walked through the front door like it was any other night. The same routine. The same familiar walls. The same woman waiting for him inside. He had no reason to be afraid. No reason to suspect that the person he trusted most was the one who wanted him dead. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He kicked off his shoes. Placed his keys on the counter. He had no idea that, at that very moment, someone was already inside. Waiting. Watching. Holding their breath in the dark. The plan had been set in motion hours earlier. A carefully timed phone call. A text message that confirmed everything was ready. She had left the back door unlocked, just like they agreed. But in those last moments, as he poured himself a drink, as he sighed from a long day, as he turned the corner, did he sense it? A shift in the air? The faintest breath of something wrong? The first blow was sudden, a blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Enough to knock him down, but not enough to kill him. He gasped, struggling to make sense of what was happening, reaching out for something, anything. Then, the gunshot. It echoed through the house, loud and final. She was the one who called 911. Her voice shaking, breathless, the perfect performance of a wife in shock. There's blood everywhere. Someone broke in. The dispatcher tried to calm her. Ma'am, stay on the line. Help is on the way. She sobbed, gasped, made sure the panic sounded real. But when officers arrived, when they stepped inside that house, something was off. The crime scene was too perfect. The ransacked drawers, barely disturbed. The broken glass, placed too neatly. The crime scene was staged, but something didn't add up. She stuck to her story. A robbery gone wrong. Her husband had surprised them. They panicked, shot him, fled. But there were no signs of forced entry. No neighbors reported hearing anyone leave. And then, there was her alibi. It started crumbling under pressure. Where had she been exactly at the time of the murder? What time did she come home? Who could verify her story? And then investigators found something. Something small. Something that changed everything. A single text message. Not to a friend. Not to family. To him. The inmate. It was short. Just 2 words. It's done. That was all it took. Because when they confronted her, when they laid the evidence in front of her, the mask began to slip. And they realized she wasn't just the grieving widow. She was a murderer. The grief didn't last long. Not real grief, anyway. The morning after her husband's murder, before the crime scene tape had even been removed, she was already making her next move. Detectives watched as she walked into the bank, calm, composed, not a tear in sight. She slid her husband's debit card across the counter. She wasn't here to close accounts. She wasn't here to settle his affairs. She was here for the money. $700,000. The reason her husband was dead. The reason she had risked everything. But greed has a way of making people reckless. The first mistake came when she tried to withdraw a large sum in cash. The bank teller hesitated. A flag was raised. There were protocols for this. When a spouse dies suddenly, the insurance payout doesn't just get handed over in stacks of $100 bills. A call was made. Not to her. Not to the felon she was planning to run away with. To the police. At first, detectives watched from a distance. They didn't move too fast. They wanted to see what she would do next. And what she did sealed her fate. That same afternoon, Cameras caught her in a parking lot. Not just any parking lot. The same one where her felon lover had been released from prison just weeks earlier. She sat in her car, waiting, looking over her shoulder, checking the time. Then he appeared. He slid into the passenger seat like it was any other day, like he belonged there, like they hadn't just taken someone's life together. The way they spoke, the way their eyes met, it wasn't grief. It was relief. But what they didn't know was that detectives were already building their case. The surveillance footage, the flagged bank transaction, the suspiciously timed text messages. And then came the biggest mistake of all. A call from the prison. An inmate who had overheard everything, who had seen the way the officer had been around her lover, had heard whispers about their plan, had connected the dots. He wanted a deal. You might want to look at her phone records, he said. It wasn't just one message. They were planning this for months. When detectives got the warrant and pulled the records, it was worse than they expected. Thousands of messages. Not just about love. Not just about escape. About murder. About money. About how they would do it. The interrogation room was cold. She sat across from two detectives, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. They started slow. You've been through a lot, one of them said. We just need to clear some things up. She played the part. The grieving widow. The woman in shock. Until they showed her the phone records. Until they pressed play on the security footage. Until they leaned in and said, "You're lying. We know about the affair." Her face changed. The cracks began to show. Then came the final blow. Did you really think you'd get away with it? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Her hands clenched in her lap. She's interrogated and confronted with evidence. The detectives know she's guilty, but she plays her role well, crying, denying, and twisting the truth just enough to create doubt. She claims she was manipulated by the felon, that she had no idea what he was planning. Without enough solid evidence to charge her, they let her go for now. The plan had worked. Her husband was gone. The life insurance money was within reach. The future she had imagined, far from prison walls, far from the life she once lived, was finally here. But she had made one fatal mistake. She trusted a killer. At first, everything seemed fine. The felon played his part. He whispered promises, told her to be patient, assured her they would disappear together, just like they planned. But something was off. The messages became colder. The late-night calls stopped. He was distant, distracted. And then he started making demands. Meet me tonight. Alone. No questions. She hesitated. Why? A pause. Then, because we have unfinished business. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't love anymore. This wasn't the man who had once written her letters from behind bars, who had promised her a new life. This was someone else. Someone dangerous. The night air was thick, heavy. The parking lot was empty, just like he had said it would be. No cameras. No witnesses. She stepped out of her car, looking around. Then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Where's the money? His voice was different. No warmth. No affection. Just cold, sharp edges. I don't have it yet, she said, her voice unsteady. He sighed, shaking his head. See, that's a problem. Her breath hitched. She had helped him kill her husband. She had risked everything for him. But now he didn't need her anymore. And he wasn't about to split the money. We had a deal, she whispered, stepping back. He smiled. Yeah, we did. Then gunfire. One shot. Then another. She collapsed, gasping, clutching her chest. For a moment, everything was silent. Just the sound of the wind, the distant hum of passing cars. Then, the sound of footsteps walking away. Detectives arrived within the hour. The crime scene was almost too familiar. Another lifeless body, another betrayal, another case of love turning to murder. But this time, there was no cover-up. No fake 911 call. No staged robbery. Just the brutal, undeniable truth: she had chosen the wrong man. And now, She was gone. The courtroom was silent as the judge entered. Every seat was filled, family members, reporters, former colleagues, and strangers who had followed the case with morbid fascination. The trial had gripped the nation. A corrections officer who crossed the line. A felon who played her like a game of chess. A murder-for-hire plot that unraveled in the most brutal way. As the prosecution laid out its case, the details were chilling. They showed the text messages, each one a breadcrumb leading to the inevitable. He won't see it coming. We'll be free soon. We deserve this. Then, the financial records, withdrawals made after her husband's murder, meetings between her and the felon, money that was supposed to be their future together. The jury watched as surveillance footage played, the officer pacing inside a bank, nervously withdrawing funds from her dead husband's account. The felon, waiting for her in a car just outside. Their secret wasn't a secret anymore. But the most damning evidence wasn't the texts or the money. It was betrayal itself. The felon, her so-called lover, the man she had thrown her life away for, took the stand. And in a shocking turn, he blamed her for everything. She came to me with the plan, he said, his voice even calculated. She wanted him gone. She said we could be happy. I just went along with it. Gasps filled the courtroom. The same man who had once promised her forever was now burying her deeper. The defense tried to counter. They painted her as a woman manipulated, seduced by a career criminal who saw an opportunity and took it. But the jury wasn't convinced. She wasn't just manipulated. She was a willing accomplice. The verdict was swift. Guilty. When the judge read her sentence, she barely flinched. It was as if she had accepted her fate long before the jury had. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. The felon faced justice. He had orchestrated not one, but 2 murders, and the state wasn't going easy on him. The death penalty. As the gavel struck, the courtroom erupted. Whispers, murmurs, quiet sobs from the victim's family. Outside, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones shoved into the faces of those closest to the case. Justice was served today, one prosecutor said firmly, but no sentence can bring back the lives lost. The officer's former colleagues spoke in hushed tones. Some had suspected the affair, but no one had imagined it would come to this. She wasn't just one of us, a fellow guard admitted. She was our friend. We trusted her. And she betrayed everything we stood for. The victim's family declined interviews. But in their statement, they made one thing clear. No amount of prison time or legal proceedings would bring their loved one back. As for the felon, he showed no remorse. No final words. Just a cold, empty stare as he was led from the courtroom, knowing his days were numbered. The story should have ended there. But for those left behind, it never truly ended. A child grew up without a father. A family lived with an unfillable void. A prison staff reeled from the shocking betrayal of one of their own. In the end, no one won. Not the wife who traded her morals for love. Not the felon who thought he could outsmart the system. Not the husband who never saw it coming. 2 lives lost. 1 life behind bars. And one haunting lesson. When greed and passion collide, the cost is always paid in blood. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a calculated betrayal fueled by greed. A plan that started behind prison walls and ended in bloodshed. A woman who traded loyalty for lust. A man who saw her as nothing more than a pawn. 2 murders, 1 life behind bars, and a devastating truth. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who destroy us. But what do you think? Could anyone have stopped this before it was too late? Were the warning signs ignored? Or was this fate sealed from the start? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you found this case as shocking as I did, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Unmasked and turn on notifications so you never miss a new true crime documentary. There are always more stories to uncover, more lessons to be learned, and sometimes The truth is even darker than we can imagine.